Well, I suspect we'll have some people wandering in. I just wanted to let you know I'm Whitney. I'm the promotions coordinator here. And in lieu of introduction, this panel was really put together by John Beck from Our Daily Work, Our Daily Lives. And I'm going to let him go ahead and set the setting for you. And I'm going to go away.
Well, thank you for everything.
Thanks for coming. And what really made us decide that we should have a celebration of work, and especially looking at literature and work tonight, is the publication of these two books. So we have the editors of both of these books, and we have authors that are represented in both books. Working Words, edited by Liebler, down on the far right, which is a place you've never been in your entire life.
I didn't think of that.
Yeah,
Lolita's right next to me.
yeah, that's right.
She's like Obama. She's in center.
He is the editor of Working Words from Coffee House Press. And Josh Maday, on my immediate right, is one of the co-editors of On the Clock, Contemporary Short Stories of Work, from Bottom Dog Press. Both of these presses are examples of great interest now on the part of small presses to look at the experience of work. So tonight we're going to talk about that. You've got not only the two editors who are also writers in their very, very accomplished writers in their own right, but also we have Matt Bell right here, and next to him Lolita Hernandez, who both have books in front of them besides being featured in these two books. Matt is the author of How They Were Found, which I haven't read yet, and Lolita's book, Autopsy of an Engine and Other Stories from the Cadillac Plant, is probably one of the finest evocations of what it means to work in the automobile industry I think that's ever been written. It's really almost like a novel in stories. It's so wonderful. So what we thought we would do is simply, I'd like to have people tell a little bit about why they're here, what they do, and then we'll talk generally about why these books, why now? And in fact, when we get to that point, ML, why don't you kick off and talk about your experience? But why don't we just go down the row and talk a little bit about who you are, and then we'll get to ML and kick off that discussion. Start with you.
Well, I live in Saginaw. My day job, I am a stonemason, and well, in the winter time I am. But in the summer, I do a lot of estimating and stuff. It's a small family business, but it's still. And I also write fiction. That's how I know Jeff Van Zandy, actually, through Matt. I met Jeff, and we've been friends for probably about 8 years now, I think.
Yeah.
And Jeff asked me if I would co-edit the book with him. So I was, yes. So yeah, I mean, work is definitely, it's a big part of everyone's life. So and it's always, I guess I've been in conflict with it. I don't like what I do, but I do it like most people. So and that certainly comes out in my fiction. And I thought, editing an anthology of fiction about work would be, a great opportunity to highlight some of that kind of writing.
Hi, my name is Matt Bell. I'm a fiction writer as well. I'm also currently the editor at Design Books, which is a local press based out of Westland. I now have the cushy kind of academic editorial job. But before that, I worked for mostly in the restaurant industry for like 10 years. Until I went back to grad school, I was a bartender and then a restaurant manager for a couple of years. I spent most of my 20s doing that. And the story I have in On the Clock is a story that takes place in a Kentucky Fried Chicken, which was the first job I ever had. I spent a couple months working there. And as these things go, of course, like a lot of those people I worked with are still like my best friends. I mean, I actually got the job there because all of my friends from high school worked at the same Kentucky Fried Chicken. So it's like, we played football together, and then we went to work together, and then we went out together, and so work wasn't just part of my life. It was like, these are the people I spent my life with, and then proceeded to for like the rest of it. Which, I think is, even though I worked that job for a short period of time, I think part of the experience, like that small bit of work became a big part of my life. Even, and I didn't write this story until I was 25 or 26 probably when I published it. And I worked the job when I was 16. That little bit of working produced these longer ripple effects in my life. And I think, whatever we're doing, those effects continue to be huge parts of who we are.
Well, I live in Detroit. That's where I was born and raised. And I ended up at the Cadillac plant because after my university years at the University of Michigan, I sort of got in the left movement. And back in those days, which is way long ago, you guys weren't even a glint in anybody's eyes. And went to the factory to sort of organize and all that kind of stuff. And stayed, had kids, ended up single, had a household raising these kids, and then started. Well, I had been writing poetry, and then I decided I needed to write fiction. I needed some sort of more space to write on paper. And so in '06, I retired after 33.6 years with General Motors, and now I'm teaching creative writing at the University of Michigan. And I work in their semester in Detroit program to teach and write.
I'm ML Liebler. I'm on the faculty at Wayne State University in the English department. But I also have been for more than 20 years teaching a course that is very kind of unusual for what it is. It's called Introduction to Labor Studies, but it's subtitled Labor Through the Arts. I later learned as time went on that this came out of Monteith College. Monteith was kind of an art school within Wayne State in the 50s and 60s, and it ended, I think, 1980, which is right when I came to Wayne State. And the deans or the teachers in it were all from different fields. And this was kind of it was a big house on Wayne's campus. Ken Michalowski went there. A number of well-known Detroit writers and filmmakers and painters went there. And when they split the college up, they sent these instructors to various departments where they thought they fit or something. So I later learned all this, that the guy from they sent to the humanities department was a very well-known, established professor at Wayne, very cool guy, Marty Herman. And he developed this course. And it went for a number of years. He taught it, and then he kind of retired and moved on, and it came to me. And I didn't know, I just knew it was labor through the arts. So I crafted a course where we studied labor and working class through stories and poems and films and plays and artwork and whatever, everything from the Heidelberg Project to Woody Guthrie. But I also, because of the nature of it being called Introduction to Labor Studies, I also included a fair amount of history because these were incoming students into their labor program. Many of them were working in the factories and were kind of vying to become stewards in the UAW and stuff like that. Now my connection to that is I worked one summer in a factory and I made a career out. No, I didn't. That's an inside joke. No, I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather was part of the sit-down strike at Dodge, Maine in 1937. So essentially I was raised in a very working-class home and kind of taught working-class values, and that, which is what I thought everybody had until I grew up and went to other families and other corrupt families and so forth and so on. But we just lived that existence, and even as I went to college, I was the first one in my family, the only one to go to college. I ended up at Wayne State. I'm probably the least likely person, and it's been a career now, which I'm grateful for. But I kind of treat my teaching like it's work for me, and which I love. I do love my job, and I understand people who would do jobs that don't. But but I treat it like I'm working class. This is what I am. You can't take that out of the way that I approach it. Probably the reason I've been successful for all these years doing it and connecting with students and helping students and artists and writers and doing that sort of work, community work throughout. So anyway, this book was put together because of this class. It took several years to kind of come out. It was actually put together within a year or so. But it came out now, and when we get into talking about the appropriate time and stuff, I mean, all of this was a bigger plan. Now, I'm a Catholic worker, so that's another side of it. I see a bigger plan that has nothing to do with me. But so everything worked out with this, and I can tell you the horror story and the good redeeming story and everything of this particular book. But,
so a lot of folks, maybe some of you have, if you read Steinbeck or if you read Harriet Arnall, a lot of the great classics of American literature have often looked at work. Women have always been present in work. They were often doing housework or other kinds of work. But the work that you'll see in both of these anthologies is really all over the map. That is, everything from Matt's story, Alex Trebek Never Eats Fried Chicken, which is his story about working at Kentucky Fried Chicken, to other stories of people working in different kind of restaurant settings, fast food settings, offices. I mean, I think that there are plenty of office stories in all of these. Lolita, let me put you on the spot, because Lolita wrote a story that's in her other collection here that really had a human resources intern talking to a shop floor worker. And it was really about two very different framings of looking at the world. Would you talk a little bit about your experience in terms of seeing all the different kinds of people that make up a workplace and how all those people kind of fit? And maybe that's a reflection of these two books as well.
Ooh, that's a big one. As Mel and I have had occasion to discuss, I think when I talk work, because of I was so immersed in the industrial experience, not to say I didn't do my stint as a waitress and all that, but I was so immersed in the industrial experience, it still oozes out of my pores. And when I think of work, I think of those damn pistons, and I think of oil pans, and I think of I spent 5 years actually on the motor line, and then I segued into the Cadillac engineering skilled trades that had to do with prototype cars and so on and so forth. I was the first woman in that trade. And so when I think about that, I always think of my hands immersed in some grease, some oil, and all that kind of stuff. And it's so incredibly different than where I'm at now. So that's actually how I'm going to frame it. I'm not even going to frame it. And when I started working at University of Michigan, because I actually somewhere along the line got an MFA in creative writing and a BA, and I came to the plant with a BA in psychology, and then I got a BA in newsprint journalism. So when I ended up at the University of Michigan through Ken Michalowski, actually, at the residential college, the first thing that I realized that I speak the same language as everybody. I mean, it's like half the time I couldn't understand their circuitous thinking and their amas and like all this kind of tangential thinking, and I mean, nothing ever seemed to be direct, and everything seemed to be so difficult for them to figure out. And so I'm only now sort of getting used to the language, because in the factory you have to deal with things more directly, or else you get like very swallowed up. And as a woman, you certainly have to learn how to sort of struggle for yourself in some kind of way. And sometimes you have to, get your little sailor language going, and your little posturing, and your little, your little stuff going as methods of survival. I'm just going to tell you a story. I rarely ever talk about it. When I was I was the first woman in my trade, and a few months later, another woman came, and then a couple of years later, 3 other women came, and of course, we were just going through all of these issues with the men. They just couldn't figure out what these women here. That means it's going to denigrate their trade, and blah blah this and blah blah that. So one of the women was a very cute, very pert blonde woman, a hell of a mechanic. But she was just very cute. So one of the guys wrote this thing, a little poem about her, a little stripped poem called Susie Cupcake, and it was really demeaning. And he circulated it. It just got to be a big thing. So he was a union guy, and she was a union guy, or union woman, and it was just all this tension and this upsetness going on, and all of us were feeling all the pressure of all the taunts and harassment and so on and so forth we've been going through with these stupid men. So and then the union came in, and of course the union is like, well, it's her and it's him. Well, so guess he gets a little slap on the wrist. He goes to the Bahamas for a couple of weeks. So there was really no real support for her. So, and here's this 5 women. So I said, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to actually stick together. We're going to have to do something to fight this thing. So we all gathered in. One of the women had a van. And at lunchtime, we said, okay, this Friday we're going to gather in that van, and we're going to talk it out. And we had our little, we brought our potluck sandwiches and veggies and so on and so forth, and a little bit of liquid refreshment, to sort of like speed the conversation. And we talked it out, and we walked back in there sort of like, like, we're going to get you guys. It was something about it, and I think from that moment on, with that kind of unity, and it's sort of, admitting that, look, you guys have been fucking with us, and we're not going to take this anymore. And then from then on, we instituted what was called van days, and that's where we would go and we would sort of talk it out when we were having those kinds of issues that were going on in the workplace, which there were a lot of them. So, but I want you to understand that was a different way of dealing with things than probably what we're taking out of that the story. Yes, I am a virgin. So I'll stop there with that.
Well, but let me ask you the question: do you find why write it? Do you find that writing about work helps you reflect back on experiences like that, or do you draw on those experiences very purposefully when you're writing the short stories? And
oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I just feel as if I'm having the whole weight of it sitting on me. And I'm having all of the voices in my head, because it was really a question of survival. Back then, it was a little grittier than it is now, and it wasn't as gritty as it was, say, like in the 40s or 50s. But it was pretty. When I started in '73, and that was when, at least in General Motors, there was a real big wave of women went in there. You have to realize it was at the end of the, it was after the Civil Rights era, so there were more rights for minority people and women, and so there was more of everybody getting into those plants. Now, I worked at the Cadillac plant, which at that time, I don't know what you call them, the Grand Dragoon or the head poopah, whatever, of the Ku Klux Klan of something worked in there. So in the Cadillac plant, it was very, very segregated. It was very ugly and a lot of tensions. As a matter of fact, the first day I went into the Cadillac plant, and I went into the women's room, and I went into the stall, and I looked at the side, and here was KKK and scrawled in there. Now, this is in Southwest Detroit. And I've lived in Detroit all my life. At that time, I was 26 or something like that. I'd never seen anything like that. You just heard about it. That was the South. So there were a lot of issues.
Well, but let me open it up to all of you. I mean, with those kind of experiences with working in fast food, why write about work? Why not walk away from that and say, let's write about, let's instead write science fiction novels, or let's instead write, English set piece mysteries or something else. I mean, why spend your time writing about work with those kind of tensions or those kinds of experiences?
Well, I would say I probably, I was talking to Josh on this, well, this really here, where I think like work is not something I write about a ton anymore, where I used to write more of it. Maybe hard pressed to find a person who has a job in my book. But
hard pressed to find a job in Michigan.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
that's
yes,
why
yes.
you can't
That's
find
right.
it
No, it's a
anymore.
really experimental take on unemployment. But but I also think when with students and and I know with the story of mine that's in this book, one of the things that's great about the workplace is that everything that happens in the real world is in the workplace. All the petty stuff that's on the workplace, all the good stuff happens at work. Work has these built-in conflicts that are amazing for fiction. You're stuck at your job with people you may like or dislike. That some people you have incredible, horrible enmity toward, and of course have personal relationships that cause all kinds of trouble. And with young writers, one of the hard things with stories is getting all that to work. It's like, well, they can't leave if they're at work, so the tension builds. Work is a great place for stories to be set. So I think, beyond the political and the ideological reasons for it, I think there's good things about fiction in workplace that just fly in a way that if you tried to keep these same like 6 disconnected sort of people full of animosity together in some other setting, you couldn't keep them in the room together. But you stick me in the kitchen.
Be a family, for example.
Right, exactly, right. That's why their stories set at Thanksgiving, right? You can't leave, So I think work has this innate sort of tension to it that can be very good for fiction. So there's craft reasons as well as sort of political or ideological reasons that it's a very good place for story.
Other comments? And
I was thinking on that point, just as I was sitting here thinking about writing about work, I'm wondering if it's like a sort of a special place in the heart of writers, because I consider writers and artists who coined the term day job. You're doing it. It's not what you really want to be doing. You'd rather be spending your time working on your craft. And so that in itself has an interesting dichotomy. I would think that a writer would have a special relationship to the day job or the working part that maybe someone who doesn't have those other dreams might not even have.
I think not to jump in twice in a row, I apologize, guys, but I think one of the places I learned to work as a writer was because I had a job where I had to work a lot. I feel like the year I learned to work every day as a writer was 2007, and it was one of my last years as a restaurant manager, and I worked 60 hours a week, and it was so hard to have my stuff too. But I would get my schedule a month at a time, so I would sit down and be like, well, today I work 8 to 5, so I'm going to write 7 to 9. Tomorrow I work 2 to midnight, so I'm going to write 8 in the morning till 10. And because I had to be disciplined, I learned discipline. And now that my schedule is a little more my own, thank God I have that. If I hadn't had to work like that, I wouldn't be able to write like this.
For me, the writing at work, and I'm always continually surrounded by these issues. It never goes away, and it has to go somewhere. You have to do something with it, or else you absolutely go nuts. I wrote this out of grief, just grieving the whole demise of the plant and the breakup of the family, because these plants, as you in work situations are you become families whether you like it or not, dysfunctional or not. In a factory, actually, especially a really large one, it's a city.
Mm-hmm.
It is a city. Anything you want to do, you could do in their factory. Just think about it. You could do everything. You can get everything. We're not even going to go into details on that. And so when that broke up, other people grieved in a number of ways. I can't even tell you the number of men we found off at corners crying and so on and so forth. But I was ever so thankful that I had the ability to write it out, and as Jorge Luis Borges would say, take these trials and tribulations and make art out of it, which is what I think it's all about in the first place. Not just sort of reportage or recording it, but you know, beyond just saying such and such happened on such and such a day, but to say how do you make art out of that and make it something lasting and make it something meaningful and make it something uplifting. And I think that's where my head's at.
If you don't mind, let me put ML on the spot and talk. If you would talk a little bit about the background on the anthology, because I think people here might be interested in how in the world you got Bob Dylan, Eminem, and all sorts of other people in the same volume.
Yeah, and it kind of leads or comes out of this discussion you guys are having now. For me, I mean, one, I never, and of course my critics would agree, set out to be a writer or anything. I mean, it's in our house. I mean, you know, a poem. What's my grandparents, you know, only went to seventh grade or something like that. They didn't sit around and read poems to me. They wouldn't have known to say poem. You know, they didn't take me to the library on Saturday. They were wonderful people, but we lived a whole different kind of reality from what most poets and writers, and I think Lolita can understand this too, have had. So for me, I mean, I just started scribbling stuff when I was about 7 and got in trouble for it with the teachers because it was in the books, the school books. They called my grandparents, had to pay for the book and so forth. And then eventually I figured out, because there was a lot of white space around what I was doing, and it was called a poem. That was in 5th grade when we had a book that had a lot of white space around it. And I said, what's this? Poem? Oh, okay. So it was all really based on these feelings that I had that I was putting on paper. And I think from where I came from, the working class, just that in various ways is how I express myself, through those experiences, through that life and that kind of lifestyle and culture, which actually, you know, Larry Smith, and that starts the story of this, but Larry Smith, you know, he created, you've probably seen it, his and you have too, John, his characteristics of the working class. Mm-hmm. I mean, all those things are true. Things, you know, just like, you know, your grandmother, in my case, screams at you, but not so the neighbors can hear. You know, that kind of stuff. This is, I mean, this may be normal now, but this was like real working class stuff. You know, you can say whatever you want inside the house, but if you say, you know, one word outside of the house, what I just said about Bernice, the neighbor, you're dead. Yeah. You're dead at now. You know. So, and that's just part of it, but he has all these characteristics on his website, which was just part of my life. And my wife, and we've been together since we were 14, I know, I'm 20, but we've been together since 14, but her dad was a police officer, and she was raised in the same neighborhood and everything. And, you know, and she doesn't really, you know, she's not an academic, she doesn't discuss the working, but I can see the same thing in her life and her beliefs and the way she raised our children and our house and everything. It all comes from the same thing, you know. So that's one part of it. Now, Larry Smith has this Bottom Dog Press. Anything he does, buy. He's not actually sitting here, but Josh's book is from him. And this guy, he came out of the neighborhood where they filmed The Deer Hunter, the mines, and what would you know what I'm thinking of? You must know. Not Matewan, but Mingo Junction. And that's where he was raised. And if you see the movie The Deer Hunter, that's where they filmed it, Mingo Junction. It was supposed to be Pennsylvania, but it was really in Ohio. And that's the life he lived, like you see in that first half of The Deer Hunter. And so he, even though he became a PhD and all that, which I am not, he, you know, started this press, the Bottom Dog Press, and the Working Dog series or something like that. And so he was my hero when I discovered him many years ago. And so in those early days of teaching my class, which I inherited, I would order books of his and use whatever he had available. Now, what he often did, maybe not anymore, but in the old days, he would only print 1,500 books. And so a couple of my classes through, they were out of print. So I don't know if he still does that or
No, I think this is a
keeps it in print.
Use it print.
Yeah,
So
see,
it's
things are
available.
different now, but it used to be like that. So I started the idea of, well, I'm Xeroxing half of this stuff in here. I'm going to put a book together. I went to a university press. They liked the idea. I signed a contract. Now, there was no permission money, and that goes to the story. So what did I do? And I'm pretty connected in the literary world. I started to ask the people, many of them whom I used their material in the class, if I could, use it. There's no money. Do you mind? Gratis. And everybody in this book agreed to that. Now, I don't know everybody personally. I know most people personally, but I don't hang out. I didn't drive up here with Bob Dylan. And he didn't come to read his poem when we were in L.A. last week. I thought he could have driven in from Malibu to read it, but he
Kick it with Eminem.
Well, Eminem was going to come to the opening party with his friend who kind of manages his thing, but he didn't. But he thought he might make it there. But how can he go out in public anymore? But at any rate, so I did that. I asked all the people that I knew, and I knew Phil Levine very well, and people who could either wrangle permissions from their publishers if they were famous and had contracts like Phil Levine, or people who had control, or they had the control of their own work. And people like Michael Moore, you get to a point like Michael Moore, who is a friend. If you look closely at his books, into his newer books, he does own the copyright to everything. So that's something probably most authors haven't figured out or aren't in a position to, but he does. So he can do whatever he wants to with things like that. So that's how it basically started. There were a few things. I wanted Woody Guthrie, of course, in it, but I do know Woody Guthrie's daughter. So I called her up in New York, and I've met her and been in her place before and all that. And she was more than happy to oblige with what she had control of. I'm good friends with Al Cooper, not Alice, but Al Cooper, who played the organ for Bob Dylan, and we're pretty tight. And he's best friends with Bob Dylan's, not manager, but the guy who runs the Dylan empire. You'll see his name, Jeff Rosen's his name, in anything related to Dylan. If you go rip open a box set, you'll see Jeff Rosen's name in it. So he called Jeff. Jeff talked to Dylan, and it's kind of a funny story, but it's true. Jeff called me at Wayne State and said, Bob said you could have anything you want gratis. Well, I only wanted the last thoughts on Woody Guthrie. So when he said that, I said, okay, can I have... He said, so what do you want? I said, well, can I have The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, Union Sundown? And then my working class roots kicked in, and I didn't want to be greedy. So I stopped, and he said, well, fine. Bob said whatever. So that happened like that, and it kind of worked that way with Jack White and Eminem as well, and being in touch with them and having connections. And then, some of the other people, Phil Levine and so on. Now, so that all came through. Now, what happened with the story is the book, the university press freaked out at a point. Not because they had been given something on a silver platter, but which they had been. Because they had a beautiful book like this. It was longer. It even had plays by Baraka. He gave me these plays and stuff. And and it was going to be like a textbook. And at the time, and Whitney might know about this, I've actually never seen this book yet. Maybe Lolita's in it, I don't know. She would tell me. But Oxford University put out this working class American literature book. Are you in it, Lolita? Some of the people in here are, and they didn't tell me, but that's all right. Because I learned something about this, too. So it was a big fat book, and I didn't know much, but it freaked out Wayne State. It's, we can't compete with Oxford. Oh my God! Oh my God! You can publish it wherever you want. We just can't take this on. This is going to be too. We're going to get killed in the market and all that. I said, okay, fine. So I talked to a few people, and I'm pretty sure Lolita had something to do with it. But I found a few presses that were interested. And again, another miracle thing. Coffee House was very interested, but I never heard from them. So I emailed the editor, and I said, look, dude, I don't even know who you are, but listen to this. You know, I got an offer to publish this book, and I hear you guys want to, but I never heard anything back from you. I'm telling you, in 20 minutes, Alan Kornblum was on the phone. My phone was ringing. I didn't answer it, just to be a boy. And I ended up talking to him in the parking lot at Wayne State and hammered out the deals. There was no written contract or anything. He told me what he could do, but he did at that time. He said it's going to take until 2010. Now, lo and behold, it goes to the point of what you're talking about. Here we are at this very time when there's 98% of America is in one kind of area that we're learning, and things are bad. And so this book comes out, and it's doing very, very well all across the country. I was just in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Santa Cruz last week. Everywhere we go, and hopefully that's true today, and it could be if each of you buy 5 copies. We sell out the books, and you know, the people in the cities that we go to read and perform. I did tag team with Wanda Coleman at Book Soup last week. It was pretty wild. So that's what happened, and that's how this book sort of came together. And they put it out, and they did a beautiful job with it. And I got people even to blurb it. Peter Coyote, I don't know Peter Coyote, but I know people who know him, so I emailed him, and he wrote back, and he said, "Love to do it, ML. I'm a blurb whore," he said. So I sent it to him, and before he goes back to Tibet, he blurbs it and sends it in, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, even to the blurbs, it was unbelievable, the support that we got out of that. Now, the thing is one of the first readings on the tour back in later in October, was in Pittsburgh, and the 2 editors of the famed Oxford University book were there. Now, you probably know this. And they're great guys, and I've known them as writers and stuff as great guys. But we started, you know, BSing about the book, and they ended up telling me that, you know, the book didn't sell real well. They never made any money off it. In fact, they ended up putting thousands in for the permission. And I learned that when they said, "Hey, just between us, how much did Lolita charge you?" I go, "Nothing." They go, "Nothing? It was $1,000 a poem for us. We're still paying on it." You know, I mean, they must have, you know, turned remortgage the house or something. So that's what I found out. So you see how things are and how they work out. You know, I mean, I didn't know anything about this book. I do know some of the people in here are in it. Jim Daniels, Larry Smith's in it. And originally, Wayne State, they were putting me through hell as a working class schmo. They said my introduction wasn't intellectual and academic enough. So I called Larry. He wrote me one because he can do that. And it came back. I didn't understand a word of it, but it was great, you know, because that's what they wanted. Well, when, you know, Alan said to do it, I said, "Hell no, man, we want yours. And we want Ben Hamper, too." You know, and so that's the story of it, and I think you'd all be better people if you had a copy. Might I say, into the camera.
Well, at this point, you know, what kind of experiences do all of you have in terms of work, in terms of reading about work? What kind of questions might you have for any of our panel in terms of their experiences as authors or as editors? So the floor is really open. You came out tonight. It's great to have you all here.
Yeah, thank you.
So, questions? Yes.
I'm just interested, Mr. Liebler has used the term working class several times. And I'd like to ask Matt and Josh, or Mr., well, you know what I mean. Do you feel like your writing is coming from a working class perspective? Or is that a term that, given the changing dynamics of the American economy and the different demographics that we have today, that perhaps isn't as meaningful to you?
You want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think anything I write really is influenced. It comes out of that because I mean I grew up in it, and that's, you know, it's my framework. That's my point of view. And so yeah, I mean I think it's impossible really to, or you'd have to try really hard to cut those roots. You know, I don't know if you can. So yeah, I would say, yeah, that's definitely characterizes. It's not specifically, you know, about work all the time, but it certainly comes out of that belief system, I think.
Yeah, the kind of family structures that go with it and that sort of thing. You know, I grew up. My parents are both college educated. My dad's a computer programmer, just retired from Dow Corning, and my mother's a school teacher. They were the first generation of their families to go to college, and we were talking about this a little bit today. I took forever to get done with college. I took like, you know, like 8th in my class in high school, and then graduated from college like 8 years later in my 3rd college, and, you know. And it just took a long time. It was like I was in some ways like unprepared, you know, that even though my parents had gone to college and stuff, like we hadn't, like that momentum wasn't always there. Like I was supposed to, but maybe didn't know how, you know. And, you know, family of GM workers and everybody, you know, that's definitely that's why my dad went to college, you know. And so come out of that, and sort of we grew up in a small town in Michigan. And I don't think that background ever really goes away. You know, at the same time, you know, I feel like I've had a lot of privileges other people haven't had too. You know, I mean, I've gone to college, I've gone to grad school, I've book came out in October, and I've been all over the country driving around book tour because I have a job where I can do that. You know, where if I had written the book 5 years ago, I wouldn't have. I would have stayed at the Friar, you know, and not done it. So I mean, it's some of both. You know, at the same time, I think if you live in Michigan, almost your idea of working class and middle class are different than other parts of the country, and we innately write out that even when we're not. You know, I finished Jonathan Franzen's Freedom last night, and it's supposedly a book of the middle class, in which everybody makes $250,000 a year, and you know, like they're, you know, kids are 19-year-old kids are negotiating like arms deals in Paraguay and stuff. It's like that is not the middle class that I'm from. Although I would have think I was middle class when I was growing up. So I think it's different when you're from this area and you're from our backgrounds. Those dynamics are changing, but I think Michigan in general has a working class aesthetic to us and to the people and to the kind of literature we produce, even when we become academics, even when we become other kinds of jobs, even when we switch to education. You don't have to stay in the factory to have that as part of you, you know.
There's an interesting set of memoir books that are about academics from the working class, and including women academics from the working class. And the one thread that runs through all of that is the belief that one day someone will walk into their office and look at them and say, "You don't belong here, you have to leave."
Oh God.
And I think that that's I think the undercurrent. You know, it never occurs to you that you've made it. It never occurs to you that you can ever take things for granted. And I've worked side by side with people that do take that for granted. You know, so you know, it's almost like they assume that this is their right place and everything else. So in that way, I think that there's a lot of things that have to be unpacked in the question. One is, you know, what's the literature of work about? Because that's changed. Like I said, you know, it used to be that everything was, we thought that work was only about getting your nails dirty.
Yeah, factory agriculture.
You know. Then there's this whole question of what does it mean to be working class? And one of my colleagues who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, was still teaching at 84 at that point, always said that we in America are in an employment society because 98% of us work for someone else. So the question is working class about the work you do, or is it about the work relation? The fact that in effect you have to work for someone else, and therefore it's about power relations. It very well may be about some notion of resource deficit, that idea that somehow I might be turned out of my office one day, and then what would I do at the university if I no longer work there? So I think that there's a lot of stuff that's caught up in that, and it has shifted. Because, you know, I don't think that we would see the kind of story that Matt wrote about fast food. It would not be the same story 20 years ago. People would not have written about that. And I think now people are trying to get their minds around what the new economy is like, what the new working class is like. Maybe the working class transforms every time a new worker meets a new boss, every time somebody, you know, punches the clock for the first time, or is worried that they're going to be 5 minutes late and that they'll be unemployed if they get fired. I'm not sure, but I think that it's really kind of a complexion, you know, that's much more, you know, complex in that fashion. Other comments?
Well, you know, I just wanted to say that I think that the politics and the economy of the time sort of is giving rise to these collections and to working people trying to voice themselves, because if anything, I think we all feel like collateral damage or collateral. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, we're figures, like, expendable, well, we have to reduce, we have to downsize, and you folks just have to go out in the streets. So as much as anything, working class means not working. But I think that's helping to give rise. It's like, us being able to voice who we are, so we're not just something in the curve there.
Well, I think maybe, I was, again, just kind of musing on what you guys are saying, there's certain assumptions that are made about the working class. And I grew up in Lansing on the west side, so half the people I went to school with, their parents worked in the factories. Mine didn't, and both worked for the state. So I saw it, but I didn't necessarily live it. I went to London for school and fell in with the punk scene there. And I met this guy, and I'll never forget him. I don't remember his name, but I'll never forget him, because he was total working class, total punk. You would look at him and think that all he did was drink and, try and be lazy and not work. He was one of the most intellectually astute men I've ever known. Like, he read frickin' Plato at night. Like, he did his working class job, and then he went home and read the classics. And he blew my little mind, because there's an automatic assumption or projection that's set up that sort of divides the working class as the body and the upper class as the mind. And I think that a lot of this fiction, at least what is gratifying to me, is that it's starting to break those down. That it can be about, working class. Even in the case of Bob Dylan, it can be popular music, but it can still showcase that. I don't know if that was just
I remember when I'm sorry.
Any kid from Duluth is going to be working class. I mean, come on.
No, that's true. But the other thing is, because that goes back to how we started this whole thing, just briefly, is that what I selected work for is stuff that some talks about work, but a lot of it talks about aspects of the working class or the working poor, living in trailer parks. Abusive situations, homosexuality. I mean, the whole spectrum of gender issues and so forth. I was looking for that. Now, somebody, of all places in Minneapolis, which I guess is the bastion of hip, reviewed the book, and they said, "Oh, this is like a satire, not a satire, but a caricature of the working class." There's people that are domestic abuse. A woman gets hit in the mouth by her husband in a trailer park, and he calls this working class, and it's like, yeah. I don't understand that. I didn't get that at all. I think what he did is just look at the first few stories, because it seemed in retrospect that's what he was talking about. But then he ended it by saying, but nonetheless, the book is something every school kid and college student should buy and read. So I couldn't figure that. I mean, that's how they are up there in Minneapolis. But I'll see, because I'm going to go there for the first time. So.
Matt, you were going to jump in?
Yeah, I'm not trouble backtracking to it a little bit. We're just talking about some of these misperceptions, and that sort of thing. Which I think some of this literature, in general, reading literature from people who are not exactly you is good for, because you break some of those things down. And in the same way, finding the literature that is of people like you that you didn't know existed is valuable. And so in some ways, these anthologies, I think, do both of those things. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who talked about a student one time who they were trying to get them to read literary magazines, and the student was just like, I'm not interested, I'm not going to read short stories, I'm going to read poems, I don't like art, I'm here because I have to be, And you found him a literary magazine, he was a baseball player at the university, found him a literary magazine that only published baseball stories. Yeah. He was like, oh! I just thought art was about things I didn't like, and it was like, and instantly was in, and I think in some ways, like, one of the neat things about work is that it's identifiable even across the job. Where, like, I might not understand a story about New York because I don't live there, and some of that stuff I don't get, but, like, your job, even though I've never had it, the same things exist in it. Yeah. I think that's why, everybody kind of has the same job in some ways, right? Like, our boss is all kind of the same person, Which is why, we work. So I think there's some really neat things that happen by crossing these divides and making these kind of books and putting all these different kinds of work together is showing that both that similarity and those differences, which both help us as readers.
Other questions, comments? Yes?
I heard you talking about Paul Clement's book, and I'll give this question to this one. Okay. But having read that book, it seems to me like we're seeing fundamental change in the economy of our country. And when I say it's a change that really has probably taken 60 years to, you know, sort of mature into what we're seeing today. But it seems to me like we're seeing a real change in the working class, and in a way that you don't see lumberjacks anymore. And there was a time when that was what people did. You know, that was the work that was there, and I think the work is changing. The work, and even if we didn't have so many cars being imported and made in other places in the world, there would have been a real change just because of mechanization. I mean, you worked in General Motors all those years. How many people worked there to build a car when you went in, and how many were needed when you left? So I think, you know, the working class is going to change just by the sheer fact that the work that needs to be done is different.
And just so everyone knows, the book that you're talking about is Punching Out by Paul Clemens, his new book that has to do with the closing of the Bud factory on the east side of Detroit. And I just started it, and it's a wonderful
Featured
piece
last
of work.
week on the Daily Show.
Yeah.
So, comments on that, the whole change in work and
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that's really, I think, one of the main things we were looking for or one of the things we were aiming for when we put this collection together was to show the transition that's happening, or that has been happening. They call it post-industrial society, but it's been going on, for 60 years, and now it's kind of like coming to fruition that working with your hands isn't necessarily grease, but it's still more technical stuff. There's more. There's different kinds of work. There's more training involved, I think.
At least different.
Yeah. There's people need to go to vocational schools and stuff like that. But it's changing. I think that's one of the things. That's one of the reasons we have the factory as well as the office and technology, more of the technology side.
But even how much of that is guaranteed and falling off?
It seems to me a lot of it is shifting towards the service industry.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
the people of my generation, I can't think of hardly anyone I know that hasn't worked in a restaurant or a bar, or I was a waitress for 5 years. That's,
Exactly.
where a lot of those people might have previously gone to the factories.
Right,
They're
exactly.
now, and it's a really interesting shift because it's built on the assumption that people have expendable income.
Right.
And so half the time I'm wondering how many of these people are servers themselves that are eating here. Or, I wonder how long that's sustainable, that industry can keep growing when the employment rate is going down so much.
Exactly.
How much longer will there be people to spend money there?
Exactly.
It's kind of...
Well, I think it's not sustainable, which is, and everybody knows that a little bit. But doesn't mean there's money to be made by riding it out. There's money to be made in the meantime. These things are obviously. It's a funny thing is when you work as a waiter in the restaurant, you think you're seeing the business, and you're missing the business. Just like when you're working in a factory, you're working for something like a content producing company or something. What you're doing is often not the product that is making the money. The real estate part of restaurants is really like a whole nother thing. Like the way people get the land and use the land, and that the restaurant is like paying for the land so that later it can be sold for more. And it's like, who cares about the restaurant? Restaurants make hardly any money anyway, but they buy commercial property and build it up. And so like you miss that stuff as a worker. So like there's this, you're part of this weird future productivity, that you're paying for like a really great land deal in 30 years by like selling burritos today. It's confusing, and of course you just miss it when you're the worker. It's a very, very weird economy that we've built as our manufacturing has fallen off, as we've found other ways to continue to grow. We made insane things that don't exist make money, you know, which is impressive.
We're going to be back
And
in
awful.
2 years with real estate anthology.
Right, right. We probably
Fiction-
will, the housing
fiction and real estate. Other comments or questions?
Can I
from-
You're going to say something.
Yeah, I did want to throw one little quickie in though. I mean, there are some factory jobs still out there, and some factory, some folks being hired in. And this past summer, for example, there was a hiring at the Chrysler plant, Jefferson North in Detroit, and by noontime, 26 workers walked off the line. Just hired in that morning, left by noontime. Well, you're working side by side with someone who's making twice what you're making and doing really seriously hard work, and there's no future in it. There's not even a quick buck to be made in that. So I mean that whole, because like when we all hired in, you stuck it out. You got made your 90 days, and you know, and so on and so forth. But you saw a future, Benny's at the end of the line, and so on and so forth. So even in that regard, there's been a change, as you've well noted.
And one thing I would mention, though, I think in relation to what Lolita was just picking up, is that even though all of us aren't lumberjacks, there still are lumberjacks on there. Even though all of us are not farmers, there's still, I mean, the agricultural economy is still a large part. There are less and less people doing more and more. And a perfect example, as Lolita's laying out, is that a lot of those workers, it's not only because they're not making any money, they're now working 56 minutes out of the hour, and they're totally machine-paced in a way that because of part shortages, because of machine breakdowns and other things, was not the reality of the auto plants when you hired in. So I think what we've got higher productivity than ever before. I mean, our auto workers are the most productive on earth, and there will continue to be factory jobs. The question is whether or not somebody can actually put up with 30 years of that or
Right.
anymore, because you flattened job ladders. There are no more job ladders. Very few union jobs to be able to, full-time union jobs to go into. So in reality, it's a different place. But I think that there will be new industries, there will be new kinds of jobs, and people will write about them. That is, we will be back in 5 years or 10 years with a different set of anthologies, with a different set of occupations, and still it will be those ties that bind about how the workplace is like a family, about the tensions that get worked out across a diverse group of people, and all the stuff I think that we've heard about tonight. Any last questions from any of you? Yes, Michelle, and then up to the front.
I'm interested in how class and politics intersect, and all of you are speaking of, it's completely obvious what the working class is, and when I listen to the political debate, nobody mentions the working class. We're all middle class, and they speak as though we should all in fact be entrepreneurs. And
No, that's just a new governor.
No, that's the
lot of
discourse.
I agree.
That's the discourse.
Yeah,
It is.
and so I always think about, sort of what can be done to counter that, and does working class literature play a role in it?
Well, I think it does. I mean, I think that was what I was, trying to say a little bit ago, is that all of this literature is emerging out of this, suppression of who we are and what we do and what we really mean to the economy. I mean, actually, I think, especially for industrial workers, we're the fault. We're the fault of factories failing. We're the fault of, automobiles not. Yeah, sure, they didn't design it, but we didn't put quality into it and all that. I mean, workers make too much money. They want benefits. They want this.
Watching the
routine.
blame of the auto industry workers during the bailouts and that was amazing. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah.
Where it was like, it wasn't the executives that had bailed, it was like the working
Exactly.
person. It was insane. I mean, and I'd never seen it before. Just watch like the people at the bottom of an industry be reviled for what the industry had become.
Exactly.
It was a different thing. And I think partly it is because everyone feels like that's not who they are, because we don't all work in factories, we don't all work in farms anymore. And so like you could go to your restaurant job and like look down on the people who are working in the factories, which makes no sense because you guys are in the boat together, you know, like
Exactly,
but it
exactly.
doesn't feel like it anymore. The service is separate from manufacturing.
Well, the whole thing is a major, and I agree with you that and this is kind of where I come from, and Lolita would know this as an activist from college when she first got into it. But it's that 3-tier thing, you know, politics and culture and economics as far as that goes, and that's always been part of it for me. But in the way that I look at all this stuff, but I was, you know, thinking that recently, Scott Martell, a friend of mine, who used to write for the newspapers, he is working on a book of the biography of Detroit. And he came to my Motown class, I teach this Detroit class.
Can I get his name?
Huh?
Can I get his name from
Great
his done?
title.
Yeah, Martell,
I
yeah.
want him here.
So at any rate, he was just in the other day, and he said, how many of you come from working class factory worker families? And only me and him, and then an older student in the class raised our hand. So you're right, there's this really seriously changing whatever. I would say I'd be curious to see. The other thing is when I was teaching this labor class 10, 15 years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to bring this into my English classes and teach working class literature. My students at Wayne State rejected and refused to look at this stuff. They wouldn't read House on Mango Street, which is like 60 pages. They wouldn't read Grapes of Wrath. And I didn't understand that. I thought, we are the working class, you know. Maybe this was the changing dynamic. And someone at the Xerox machine, I was complaining about that. And she said, look, you know, these people are coming to college because they want to get out of here. You're holding a big mirror up to them. But I think that's changing now. That was 15 years ago. So I don't know what all that meant, but I just wanted to tell this story.
And you.
Well, I kind of raised two questions. Do you think people are perceiving working class nowadays as meaning unskilled labor? Is that kind of maybe sometimes, you know, driving between the lines? I don't know. I just wondered about that.
I think working class is kind of, and middle class have become this interchangeable because so few people really make that much money at all anymore. I mean, the other thing that I was going to say, though, and it goes to your point and everything, the points you guys are making here, and it's something I'm kind of obsessed with lately, is how do you get 98% of the people, or working class people anyway, like in Michigan, and out of work people, how do you get them to, well, one, vote for Republicans in large numbers, and totally turn against their own best interests? And so, and this is what I think is the mastermind of the 2%, is they've been able to do that and to turn it all in on us. It's, you know, we don't know how to work and we can't do it. I mean, we just had the governor speak last week, and he, you know, and I know this will come down, and we know it in the public sector, but we're going to jobs. Okay, first thing we do, let's lay off the police, let's get rid of the firemen, the teachers, and the garbage guys. Forget them. Jobs. You know, I mean, and everybody buys this stuff. Popularity is through the roof, and everybody's out of work. You know, this is amazing to me, how, even with the other election, how do you get people to do that? I just don't get it. You know, and I've been talking to people who I thought were in the 2%, in the family.
I wonder how much of it is a social thing, because they play so hard on fear and on dividing people that they're thinking, well, you know, and they're preaching that saving money thing, which we all get right now.
I think the social issues thing is a huge part, though.
Yeah.
You're preying on the social conservatism of people to get them to vote against their own best interest. If you gave me, you know, pro-life and anti-gay marriage and any other crazy thing, I could pass it. You know what I mean? It's just, it really is sad how much those two things.
Well, that's the genius of these people.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing.
We've got to turn it on them, is what we've got to do.
Well, you know, the UAW, for example, is you know, always says that it's the unions that created the middle class. So I guess these definitions are going to get really clear, because there's just a couple of 3 people on the top, and the rest of us are like flopping right down there, so we'll all be clear on who we are in a minute.
In a quick minute.
Real quick minute.
And
Well,
my other quick
yeah.
second question was, how did the organizing go when you got to the Candle Light plant?
Well, that was very interesting. We went
Sucked her right in.
We went in to organize people who were already organized, but really they weren't. You know, I had a very left, you know, perception, so or leaning. So I had a lot to learn about. I had to get proletarianized myself, really, to understand. And but we had some really delicious fights. We started some caucuses, and we started some stuff. And we pretty much shook them up over there. I loved it. It was great.
Plus, she was one of the first female skilled trades workers. So that's a whole new ground that was being broken that had to be organized.
And we learned a lot about distributing our literature, using high-low drivers, and you know, taking advantage of all the culture of the city. Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Now, let me make 2 quick announcements. First of all, would we please thank our panel? I think they were